Minister of Community and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's my pleasure to move second reading of Bill 26, an act to combat poverty and fight for Albertans with disabilities. This is a truly historic bill that, if passed, will index benefit rates to help 250,000 Albertans. This legislation fights poverty, protects people with disabilities' right to dignity, and brings greater stability to people's lives. It also corrects a fundamental and historic lack of fairness for persons with disabilities, low-income Albertans, and low-income seniors whose supports seldom kept pace with inflation. This bill will forever change how social programs are delivered in this province, and we are very proud to bring it forward. But I want to be clear that we have not done this alone. I want to recognize the two co-sponsors of this legislation, MLA for St. Albert and MLA for Lethbridge East. Both MLAs, along with many of my colleagues, have been strong advocates on these issues for a long time. Madam Speaker, I also want to thank the thousands of self-advocates, anti-poverty advocates, seniors, persons with disabilities, families, and community leaders who have also advocated for these changes. Self-advocates and community leaders like Ian Young, Mark Crichton, Mary Salvani, Sandra D. Brown, Leah McCrory, Amy Park, Les Landry, just to name a few. Groups like Disability Action Hall in Calgary, Vibrant Communities Calgary, End Poverty Edmonton, Edmonton Social Planning Council, Inclusion Alberta, Public Interest Alberta, Self-Advocacy Federation, Momentum, YWCA, Calgary Housing Company, United Way, Women's Centers, just to name a few. For many years, these and many other individuals and groups have created petitions, organized town halls and meetings, made phone calls and written letters calling for this change. So, to these advocates and leaders, I want to say your work has not been in vain. Unlike the previous government, our government heard you and is taking action. It is because of your commitment and dedication that our bill is here today. So thank you for continuing to push, for telling your stories, and advocating for all Albertans. Please know our government is with you and fighting for you. Madam Speaker, AISH, Services for Low-Income Albertans, and support for seniors have been a priority for our government since day one. When times got tough, instead of making reckless cuts like the member opposite proposed, we ensured our public services are protected and strengthened. We added $182 million in funding to AISH to ensure Albertans who needed support could get it and weren't turned away. We have protected sports for seniors and invested in healthcare. We took action to fight poverty and help low-income families through our investment in Alberta Child Benefit, $25 million increase to FCSS, increase to minimum wage, and a $1.2 billion investment in affordable housing. And we are not done fighting. We have always committed to looking at the benefit levels as the province finances permit. And through this bill, we are keeping that promise. As our province is coming out of the worst recession in generations, we are taking action to make sure we are not leaving people behind. We are ensuring this recovery reaches all Albertans. For too long, Albertans with disabilities, Albertans living on low income, and seniors had to beg governments for increases to their supports as cost of living rises. They have been subjected to politics. They have been asked to prove their need again and again. They had been blamed for the situation they find themselves in, and they had been stigmatized for being on social supports. I'm proud to say this bill puts an end to all that. This bill will establish new increased rates for age and income support as of January 1st. Most importantly, this bill will take politics out of decision making by establishing annual indexing of benefits for age, income support, and senior benefits. This bill will support 250,000 Albertans who need assistance covering their basic needs like groceries and rent. Madam Speaker, I do want to highlight that indexing will be protected in the Act, which means no government will be able to cut rates behind closed doors. This will stabilize and protect supports so they are tied to the cost of living and will ensure predictability so that individuals and families can plan for their future. Madam Speaker, this change is based on the advocacy of many Albertans. Albertans like Amber Cannon, an age recipient, who said, and I quote, "This will help me eat breakfast in the morning," end quote. Or Mark Crichton, who said, and I quote, "Indexing might mean having better food, paying all your bills, living a bit more comfortably," end quote. Or Ian Young, who said, and I quote, "Indexing will take away a bit of the desperation of managing in the face of yearly inflation." I'm glad to see the Premier recognize this voice and acknowledge the need of Albertans on age. Being heard is one thing, having your concerns addressed is gratifying, end quote. Amber, Mark, and Ian believe that all people deserve dignity and fairness, and I couldn't agree more. That is why we are indexing these supports and doing what we are doing instead of doing what the opposition would want us to do, cuts and more cuts. And we all know that is what they would do, because they have said as much, like the MLA for Lake St. Paul 2 Hills, who said the cuts are, quote, going to hurt. Or the member from Calgary Hayes, who criticized sports for people with disabilities when he said government has, quote, a whole variety of giveaways from light bulbs to better health care for disabled persons. Or the leader of official opposition, who said that spending level should be in line with BC, which means $500 cut per month to age. We think this is the wrong thing to do. We believe these 250,000 Albertans deserve better. We believe we need to put politics aside and do what is right for Albertans. That is why, in addition to indexing, we are proposing other changes. For instance, supplemental and personal benefit associated with these programs will also be indexed. Families with children will see added supports. Asset limit will be changed to ensure Albertans don't need to jump through multiple hoops to get the supports they need. The asset limit for the age child allowance will increase from $3,000 to $100,000. In other words, once you qualify for age, you qualify for child benefit too. This will allow people to get access to supports for their children, like a child care benefit or emergency benefit for an unforeseen or individual-specific situation. The asset test for age personal benefit will also increase from $3,000 to $5,000, so they don't have to deplete everything to get those benefits. Madam Speaker, all of the changes in this bill follow a commitment of our government since day one. Nothing about us without us. We have heard from Albertans that these changes are needed and long overdue. We have heard their stories. We believe their stories are real, their challenges are real, and their pain is real. I can tell you with absolute certainty that cuts are not what Albertans want. They want stability so they can live their lives and care for their families. They want action to fight poverty. They want investment in Albertans to support increased opportunity in our communities. And this is what this bill is about. And this is why we are so proud to bring this forward. But I also want to be very clear. We know there is more work to do, and we are committed to undertake that work. For instance, the ACE program, which was established in 1979, uses the term severely handicapped. Quite frankly, Albertans no longer use this term. We will address their concern with the name of the program and work with them to replace this with a more suitable name. We will work with all concerned to look at the cohabitating partners policy and explore what type of income should be exempt and the exemption levels. This bill is an important step forward, but there is more to do with the issues I outlined and other issues, and we will do that. We will continue listening to Albertans, work collaboratively with them to make life better for Albertans. So thank you once again to everyone who shared their feedback to make this bill possible. And I want to end my comments with a Nelson Mandela's quote that was shared with me by Franco Savoya from Vibrant Communities, Calgary. Quote, like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural. It is man-made, and it can be overcome and eradicated by the actions of human beings, end quote. So, Madam Speaker, we all have Albertans living in poverty in our communities and in our constituencies. As their representatives, we can and must take action to end poverty. And we know Bill 26 is an important step in making this a reality. So thank you, Madam Speaker, and I hope all my colleagues will speak in support of this bill and in support of all those thousands of Albertans whose life will be positively impacted by this bill. Thank you very much. With that,
Thank you, Minister. I'll now recognize the Honourable Member for Lac-La-Biche St. Paul Hill.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm very happy to rise today to speak to Bill 26, an act to combat poverty and fight for Albertans with disabilities, and hopefully the Minister will be able to answer a couple of questions that I still have on it. There are thousands of Albertans living on AISH, income supports, receiving seniors benefits, and other supports that have been long waiting the indexing of their programs to CPI. You know, when I first read the bill and was looking at this speech, it reminded me of, I believe it was a year and a half ago or 2 years ago that I tabled a letter in the chamber that was brought to me by two seniors from Willingdon that drove all the way to my office in St. Paul to deliver a letter along with a quarter, which summed up the total increase to their seniors' benefit. Actually, it was a penny over because they'd each received 1 cent per month increase to their seniors' benefit. So they rounded it up to a quarter just to make it easier for me to bring to the House. So, and I'm also reminded of the question that I had to the Minister, I believe during the spring session, where the clawback formula, when it comes to age payments, the only ones that are really affected is seniors that they get clawed back because they're seniors benefits, and it's not the same as if they were a cohabiter that had a job that was bringing in that much money, they wouldn't be clawed back, but because it was seniors, a seniors benefit, it would be. So if you could clarify that that has been changed in this bill, I'd be really appreciated. Also, interestingly enough, on Tuesday morning, the leader of our party, along with myself and a lot of our colleagues, went down to tour the Hope Mission in downtown Edmonton, and we stayed around there and helped to serve lunch to a bunch of homeless people there. And during the tour, we talked about one of the old buildings that they use for housing the homeless there, the Jameson building. They have been given permission to tear down that building and build a new facility in 2 phases. The first phase is about $15 million. They're having a hard time raising the funds to get that done. The City of Edmonton isn't being very helpful. But at the same time, we look at the recent announcement by the government of over $1 billion to build the West Line LRT. I just find it interesting that we seem to really have our priorities a little bit skewed when it comes to that. But I'll go on with the rest. But I just thought it was interesting that a small project of $15 million can't be supported, but building a West Line LRT where there's already access by bus service, taxi service, Uber, many forms of transportation to get you from the West End to downtown is benefits by over $1 billion from the province. As the cost of living increases year to year, making it more difficult for low-income Albertans to afford the necessities, we also see that life is becoming ever more expensive for Albertans under this NDP government. The NDP's carbon tax, which affects low-income families disproportionately, has made it more difficult for families to heat their homes in our frigid winters or to drive to work. It is not only the case that the cost of everything has gone up under this NDP government, but the ability to afford the necessities has also become more challenging. The NDP has driven away jobs and those who create jobs. Investment is fleeing due to the uncertain, bureaucratic and burdened economic climate led on the NDP's increased regulatory red tape. It has become more and more difficult for Albertans to find jobs. And so it is vastly more important in the light of this to strengthen and improve supports to those who need them. In the case of Bill 26, I'm happy to see that there will be some one-time catch-up increase to financial supports for recipients of AISH, something that has been mentioned to me many times in my office as well. Also to Alberta Seniors Benefit and Supportive Living and Lodges subsidies. The government stated the cost of this initial increase, but has not yet specified what this will be costing the government annually in the years to come. There needs to be transparency in what government is doing. It is our duty as legislators to hold the government to account. Albertans deserve to know what their government is doing and why. That is their money that the government is using to do it. On this same issue of transparency, I understand that the changes that are coming to the support programs are not equal across the board. I would like for the government to elaborate on why they have decided to make greater increases to some programs than to others, and what was their rationale. Again, I'll bring up that the clawback to seniors when it comes to AISH. Can the government also elaborate on which stakeholders were consulted for the changes that were brought forward in this bill? It is crucial to ensure that proper consultation is done beforehand, as we have seen what happens when the NDP does not consult. Mr. Speaker, we know that the NDP's detrimental, burdensome policies have made it more difficult on the already strained finances of low-income and vulnerable Albertans, adding up the cost of everyday life that has become more difficult to afford, along with the cost of medications or other necessary goods. It may even be the case that this increase to AISH supports will not be enough to cover the costs that they will be incurring. Another question I have about these increases: what will be the impact on AISH recipients in regards to their CPP and medications? Will that be clawed back due to the increases in the amount that they are receiving? I'm happy to see that the amount being paid out is increasing, and that we are supporting those that need it most. However, while it is vital that we adequately provide support to those who need it, it is equally as important that we ensure we are allowing them to also help themselves and not doing anything to inhibit them from doing so. I'm happy to see that the government is increasing the asset limits, which gives the opportunity for individuals receiving these limits to save more. Under these higher limits, there is less cost to saving, or otherwise put, this decreases the clawback rate of the saving. This will help those who are trying to save up and potentially be able to graduate off financial supports. If their supports are not being clawed back as fast as they are able to save money, thanks to this increased limit, then there is more reason to save. Madam Speaker, this indexing to CPI will greatly benefit all supports recipients who have been waiting for years for an adjusted amount that reflects today's cost of living increases. We've devastatingly heard from advocates that some cannot even afford basic necessities. This is absolutely unacceptable. The supports are in place in order to ensure that this is never the case for anyone, and the fact that this is still happening is unacceptable and must be addressed. Every Albertan, as a base, should be confident in their ability to afford personal hygiene products and other necessities. There is absolutely no one who should worry if this will be impossible for them. This is fundamentally why we have these programs in place, and it makes me happy to see that this bill will help address this. The increase in the supports that this bill addresses will go directly to the Albertans it seeks to help, and where it will be of the most use. I'm glad that it is going directly to those who need it rather than into administrative costs. Beyond this increase in payments, we must also talk about additional supports that are necessary in order to have a far-reaching beneficial impact. These supports include mental health supports, as we cannot group everyone's situation as one and treat them all the same. Strong mental health supports will greatly help Albertans with developmental disabilities and is vitally needed. On the case of mental health, I've brought forward many questions regarding the St. Therese Health Centre in St. Paul, which is the psychiatric hub for northeastern Alberta. And one of the questions that was brought to the minister by one of the local mayors was the fact that people are brought into the facility from outside of the town of St. Paul, brought in sometimes by RCMP from Lac La Biche or Cold Lake, dropped off at the hospital. They spend 4 or 5 days there and get corrected or back onto their meds. But a lot of times these folks then are discharged by the hospital with no money, sometimes without identification, unable to find their own way home. And the answer that we got, shockingly, from the minister was that that's a municipality's problem. So while we're addressing these issues, there are many more issues to consider. There must also be support to enter and participate in the labour market. Due to the current lack of jobs available to Albertans due to NDP mismanagement, there must be structure in place to help those individuals with securing a job and gives a hand up to those who are in poverty. I'm also happy that there is an increase in the supports for the recipients of income supports, Alberta Senior Benefit, and supportive living and lodge subsidy, and that this will help them in the race to keep up with the ever-increasing rising cost of living thanks to such policies as the carbon tax. This is why I'll be supporting Bill 26. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Are there any other members wishing to speak to the bill? The Honourable Member for Rimbey, Rocky Mountain, Alexander.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you to the Honourable Member from Lac La Biche Two Hills. I enjoyed his remarks today. I think they were right on the mark. I rise today to speak in support of Bill 26. I'm glad to see a piece of legislation of this kind here. In the Assembly. I actually think it should have been here a long time ago, quite frankly. I would question what took 3.5 years for the minister to get this legislation to the Assembly. But I am glad to see it here today. I like other members in this chamber, have heard from many people who are ACE recipients and heard about how tough it is to currently work live under the current numbers. We've heard that, for ACE recipients who cannot afford basic necessities, as the Honourable Member just described, basic hygiene necessities and things along those lines. And I think all of us can agree that that we have to ensure that ACE recipients are able to at least have an appropriate standard of living, and not being able to buy hygiene products, quite frankly, is appalling that they would be in a situation like that. Supporting employment for people with development disabilities also will have a far-reaching positive impact. I'm glad to see that in this bill, as well as raising asset limits for individuals receiving financial supports is important because it will allow them to save and potentially graduate off financial supports in the future. So I think this piece of legislation is good. I'm glad to see it here. I'll be happy to support it. We will have some questions that hopefully can be answered in committee of the whole by the minister, but we'll be happy to bring up some of them today. The honourable member from Lac-La-Biche-Two Hills raised some of them already. One question we have, though, is I understand that some programs, Madam Speaker, through you to the minister, have seen greater increases than others, and can the government please share how they determine the relative rate increase in each program and which stakeholders they consulted with on this? The second question, Madam Speaker, that we'd be interested in hearing about, will recipients of ACE see their CPP medications clawed back because of these increases? I think that's a good question to make sure that we've got right while we're doing this legislation. Third question that I would have is, while increases to ACE are important, it's equally important that we provide ACE recipients with educational and employment opportunities in the hopes that one day they may obtain full-time employment and graduate out of ACE. Now, not everybody's going to be able to graduate out of ACE, but there are certain circumstances where that's possible, and I think it's important that we support people that are doing that. So my question specifically, Madam Speaker, through you to the minister, what is the government doing to address the serious lack of employment opportunities for our disabled population? And then lastly, income support caseloads have continued to rise in recent years. For the category of people expected to work, caseloads rose from 29,111 in 2016 to 34,375 in 2017. That's a significant increase. And this is due in large part to negligence on economic files by this government, which has led to a massive unemployment and hardship in our province. Income supports are important, but what really is important, of course, Madam Speaker, is getting Albertans back to work. And I think it's important that this government address how they will also deal with that issue. So with that support in mind, and looking forward to some answers to questions and maybe some further conversation in committee of the whole when this piece of legislation gets there. I will also point out, though, some of the irony that I see in this legislation coming from this government at this time. I'm glad it's here. I'm glad that it is. I wish it had been here before, but as the honourable member for Lac-La-Biche-Two Hills pointed out in his speech quite well, I think it is very ironic that this government continues to hurt the less fortunate in our province significantly through their regressive carbon tax. That they continue to make life more expensive for people that are in vulnerable situations, life more expensive for fixed income seniors, which of course are also part of this legislation and important to remember. Certainly for people on ACE, I don't know how the government, with a straight face, could justify repeatedly over the last few years voting against removing the carbon tax for people in these type of circumstances. At the very least, we're against the carbon tax. I want to make that clear. So before the members across we ask what we would do, then in this case, which they like to heckle out, I'll be very, very clear. We will remove the carbon tax 100% from everybody in Alberta. But if this government they did choose to go with the carbon tax, but at the very least, they probably should have supported the opposition's attempts to be able to provide people in these type of circumstances exemptions, because it costs a lot of money. Not only the direct cost for people in a fixed income situation like that to be able to pay for heat or electricity, gas when they drive, or those type of situations. It's actually because, as you know, Madam Speaker, it ended up being a tax on everything in our society, end up with a tax on it, and it's increased for a couple of reasons. One is because most things in our society come by truck or trains, and it costs gas to be able to get them there. And then, of course, places like the grocery store had to pay extra for heat, had to pay extra for getting their products to the store, and so that then increased the cost for these people in these types of circumstances. And so, not to be able to even be able to provide them some sort of exemption from that, which we tried, and further that, the non-profit agencies, as the honourable minister knows, and I know he will agree, are non-profit partners. do significant work in working with people facing poverty in our province. I know the Honourable Minister actually worked for one of those nonprofit organizations, as did I. And so he knows the importance of that role there. And this side of the House then tried to provide an exemption to those agencies to be able to help people in those situations. And that side of the House, the NDP, voted yet again to make life harder for those individuals. And so I think it's important, as the Minister tried to, or in his remarks, talked about how he felt that we being the United Conservative Party may not be compassionate on this issue or along those lines. I think he's mistaken. But I think what's really clear, and it's fair to point out, is that this government has shown with their voting record on this issue that they are at least tone deaf to what people are experiencing. Now, I do know one point that they will often raise when we talk about this issue is that the carbon tax rebates, which have been clawed back and definitely have not kept going with the increase in carbon tax. But what this bill also impacts seniors. I don't know if all the honourable members have got to that portion of this legislation. But under this government's watch, who's brought this bill forward, they allowed seniors carbon tax rebates, which only cover the fixed side of the equation. As I was referring to earlier, Madam Speaker, of course, this is a tax on everything and has raised the cost of everything in our society. But they allow them to be crawled back 30%. To 70% without a word of protest from the Minister. And I can tell you, I know my colleagues and I suspect my colleagues in the government caucus hear about that often when we're visiting with the seniors in our community. So, well, I think this is a good first start, and we will look at some of the other questions that we have to see if we can possibly even make this legislation better or catch some stuff that the government may have missed. We definitely will continue to support it, but I do think it's worth pointing out that the government should go all the way. They shouldn't go halfway and continue to allow their carbon tax and their policies to hurt the very people that they're trying to help within this legislation. Certainly, as we know from the Premier's announcement this morning, with the decision to remove a carbon tax from drillers, a decision I would support, that is confirmation that one, the carbon tax is having a negative impact, and then two, it's not getting us the pipelines or the social license that was promised with that carbon tax. So certainly if drillers or corporations should not be receiving or having to pay that carbon tax in the future, I would think at the very least people that are on age, fixed income seniors, should not have to pay that carbon tax anymore going forward. Now, if this side of the House is fortunate enough to form government in a few more months, fortunately for them, they won't have to for much longer. But it is disappointing that the government continues to allow these people to feel pain and have to suffer consequences as a result of the decisions that this government has made. So I hope that they consider that as we're debating this bill.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Are there any members wishing to speak under 29(2)A? Seeing none, I will recognize the Honourable Member for Vermilion Lloyd-Minister, followed by the Honourable Member for Calgary McKay Northwest.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's my pleasure to rise and speak to Bill 26. And I'd like to thank the Honourable Minister for bringing forward this piece of legislation. I think that it is always important that as legislators we look to do what needs to be done to take care of the most vulnerable in society. And I'm pleased to note that the legislation extends beyond just the soon-to-be renamed assured income for the severely handicapped. I'm glad to hear that that name is going to be altered. I think that it's important that the language we use is appropriate and that the language we use when we're working with and working cooperatively with those who require assistance from government, that it be done in a compassionate way. I'd also like to thank the Minister for listing off many of the advocates that worked with him and his department in creating this legislation. I note, in fact, that he included the names of some people who have been very critical of him and his department. And I appreciate that, Minister. I think it's important that we listen to critical voices and we acknowledge that they also add to the conversation. So I think that's very healthy. I want to give a little bit of background perspective from my own perspective on this file, both as a representative MLA, but also as a member of the previous government. I will tell you, Madam Speaker, that one of the one of the initiatives and one of the measures that was taken by former Premier Alison Redford that I frankly think is one of her shining moments was when she increased the age benefit in the 2012 budget from amount by $400 from $1,188 per month to $1,588 per month. And you know, there's a lot said about previous premiers, and there's a lot said about previous ministers and certain portfolios and that sort of thing. And hindsight, of course, was always 20/20. But I will say that having just joined the government around the time that the 2012 budget was put in place, and there was a lot of criticism of that budget from the official opposition of the day. I will say that this was a measure that certainly I heartily supported. And to give you just some perspective, that increase to $1,588 was a $400 increase from the previous rate, which had last been adjusted in April of 2009. There had been a 3-year time period where there had been no adjustment. And if there's one thing that this piece of legislation finally does address, and that is that there has not been an adjustment to the AISH benefit since 2012. It has been frozen at $1,588. And I fully acknowledge that it was the party that I was part of, the government that I was part of, that made no adjustment for the first 3 years, but it was the current government that made no adjustment for the next 3 years. And so I'm glad that this legislation makes an attempt to address that 6-year time period, or really it'll be 7 years by the time that the actual increase takes effect, but that the increase in amount over that period of time is actually only about half of what it should be. And I will provide some evidence to that, and I will also be providing an amendment in committee stage that actually recommends that the basic AISH benefit be increased by more than what the current legislation calls for. Because I believe that if we're really trying to make sure that recipients are keeping up with inflation, which indexing it to CPI correctly does forward, then we shouldn't lock in the fact that over the last 6 years there has been no adjustment. And if we only increase it by $97, which is what the current legislation provides for, we are locking in the fact that we won't have the benefit correctly adjusted. I think there are a few other things that we do need to look at when we're looking at this legislation. One of the concerns I have expressed to me on a regular basis by constituents is that disability pension benefits are clawed back. So if there is someone who contributed to a disability pension or a disability plan and was receiving a benefit from that plan, that is used to then reduce the amount of their AISH benefit. I'm not sure that that's entirely fair. If, you know, at the time that they were working or at the time that they were involved in employment, if they contributed to a disability plan, they clearly will receive that benefit, but why that should then be turned around and clawed back from their AISH benefit, certainly that's something I have a great deal of difficulty explaining to my constituents that raise that as a concern. And you know, I would appreciate, you know, having that discussion perhaps at committee level, or perhaps the minister can address it during his comments on the closing of debate on second reading. Another area that I will address today as well with regards to Bill 26, and it perhaps doesn't have to show up in the legislation, but I think it is something we should very much at least look at, and I know that the minister is very aware of this issue, and that is an increasing number of recipients of AISH benefits are benefited greatly by the ownership of service dogs. And we saw that even as recently, now this is a different health situation, but on Tuesday evening we saw, you know, the incredible situation where I met a service dog that was trained to detect high and low blood sugars. I mean, if you want to talk about an amazing level of training, to be able to train a dog to be able to detect high and low blood sugars for diabetes patients. But having a dog like that, I will tell you, Madam Speaker, is not an inexpensive proposition. the initial training and acquisition of such a dog, and then the care of a dog like that is, not an inexpensive proposition. And for many of our handicapped, or for many of our recipients of benefits, I'm going to avoid that use of that word handicapped. For many of those recipients, the service dog is an absolutely vital and critical part of their lives. And that's whether that service dog assists them with a specific physical handicap, or whether it assists them with PTSD, or whether it assists them in some other way. And these dogs are as vital to them as medication. They are as vital to them for companionship and for a number of other ways. And I'm sure the minister knows where I'm heading with this. And again, this was through some of my conversations with Mr. Les Landry that he acknowledged in his opening remarks. These dogs are critical. And just as our recipients of these benefits should not have to choose between purchasing personal hygiene items and food, or paying their rent, or paying their utilities, they certainly shouldn't have to make decisions with regards to how they care for these service dogs. They have to be fed, they have to have veterinary care, there are costs involved in pet ownership. And these dogs are not just pets. These dogs are vitally important. So I'd like to see, and if it's not done in the course of the legislation, then certainly in the course of the regulations flowing out of the legislation, some provision for an allowance for those ACE recipients who have service dogs to assist them with whatever situation that they are in. I think we have to look, as I said, at pension, at the disability, or rather at the disability insurance premium, or the payouts, and how those are clawed back. And I will raise some of these in the course of debate in committee stage. But I do want to say that this is a positive matter, and I do think that the indexing of these benefits, and not just benefits under the ACE program, but other benefits, indexing them to inflation is the right thing to do. It means that for people who require the assistance and are dependent on that assistance, that they are not going to be in a situation where even when our finances are challenged, we say, look, we just simply can't afford it. That was the answer that ACE recipients received for 3 years from the government I was part of. That's the answer they've received for 3 years from this government. And I think we can both share in the acknowledgement that that answer quite simply isn't good enough. So I will be happy to support Bill 26. I will be bringing forward some amendments that I think would improve Bill 26, and I'm certainly hopeful that the minister will consider them favorably. But in the meantime, I think it is important that we as a legislature, and that we as a society indeed, recognize that it is our obligation to make sure that the most vulnerable in our society are taken care of, that the most vulnerable in our society do not get left behind. And, I speak of, in terms of my own personal approach to the things that I deal with, whether it was in my business practice, or whether it was just as a community member, or whether it was chairing our health foundation, or my involvement in the Rotary Club. It was always a chance to look for those folks that otherwise might get left behind. We live in a prosperous and caring society, Madam Speaker, and there is absolutely no reason why people should get left behind, or people should not be cared for. And I know that there are instances where that happens, and I think, quite frankly, that those are the instances that we should try to root out and eliminate in as many ways as we can. I think Bill 26 is part of that, and I will be happy to support it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Are there any members wishing to speak under 29(2)A? Seeing none, I will recognize the Honourable Member for Calgary-McKay's North South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, I'd like to start by thanking the Minister for the opportunity to sit down with him and understand the bill more clearly and have a conversation about this important bill. I really appreciate the time that he took. So the bill, it modifies ACE income support, and seniors benefit. And what I really appreciate is in the bill, it standardizes the child benefit rates for AISH and income support. So before, or where the way the legislation stands now, there's a variance between the different programs. Now the first child, $200 a month benefit in both of those programs, and subsequent children are $100 a month. And I think this is a really good idea. It makes things predictable for families, especially families who are facing difficult situations. Some other good things that I like about the bill, the asset limit changes I think are reasonable. They take reasonable circumstances into consideration. And I'm really, really grateful for indexing increases to CPI. I think that is something that we've heard from nonprofits and schools and municipalities, is how predictability is key to success. And I think for people who are who rely on these programs, they need the same sort of predictability. They need to know that from year to year, they'll be able to accommodate the increases that they'll see in their cost of living. So I'm really appreciative of that feature. And I'm really like that the seniors, people who have worked their whole lives, are getting their provincial benefits indexed as well, just like they are federally. People who rely on all of these programs are the least able to change their circumstances. So any kind of accommodation that we can make for changes that are outside of their control, I think make a lot of sense. It's the same for any person who finds themselves needing support from the government in some kind of an income support program. Things that I think could make the bill a bit better, and we'll be bringing up amendments in committee of the whole. Something that I've heard in my office is how people are treated when they're going to seek benefits, both with AISH and income support. And I will be bringing forward an amendment to deal with a client bill of rights, so that when people go to different programs for support, they have a good understanding of what to expect, what sort of treatment to expect, what kind of treatment is outside of acceptable standards, and what kind of recourse they might have if they experience something that discourages them from being able to seek help. One other thing that I'd like to see in the bill is indexing the amount of income that AISH recipients can earn without a clawback. So what we've seen over the last 3 years is that the minimum wage has increased, and what that has meant for AISH recipients is a net decrease in the amount of hours that they could work to be able to supplement the income that they're getting from AISH. And I would really like to see that income indexed as well, so that it keeps pace, and so that AISH recipients know that they won't be penalized for having a part-time job. I am really grateful for this bill. I think it's really important. One of my biggest concerns, though, is that it's taken a few years for it to come to the floor. I really wish that we had seen this 2 or 3 years ago. For some of the reasons that we've already heard this afternoon, there hasn't been an increase to AISH since 2012, and that's 6 years ago. And for people that are relying on a very low amount of money to be able to get by every month, 6 years is a long, long time. And these are people that aren't necessarily in a circumstance where they can do much about their situation. And to echo some of the sentiments that my colleague from Lloydminster. I know there's Lloydminster. Thank you, Vermilion Lloydminster. Minster. Got it. Shared earlier. These are people who we need to take care of. People who are unable to change their circumstances are people that are most deserving of our support. So for these reasons, I'm looking forward to committee of the whole, and for the most part, by and large, I really do support this bill. Thank you.
Are there any members wishing to speak under 29-2A? Seeing none, I will now recognize the member for Calgary, Lethbridge East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So before I actually get to my comments, I just have a couple of comments to previous speakers. The member from Lac-La-Biche, St. Paul, Two Hills, mentioned the Jameson Centre. Now, the Jameson Centre strikes a chord with me because it needed to be replaced back in the 1990s when I was working in parole here in Edmonton. And in fact, the former premier not only wouldn't provide any supports, he actually attended the center and threw money at the residents and told them to get a job. And I felt it was important to make that note. The second was actually kind of a question for the member from Vermilion Lloydminster, and I appreciate most of what you said. And one of the things you said was your response when people asked you about fixing it in the years from 2012 and 15, and you said your response or your party's response was we can't afford it. And you said that answer wasn't good enough, and I agree, but why didn't you speak up? But that's just something for you to think about. You did? Okay, thank you. So I'm standing here today in support of this bill, and I do so on behalf of my constituents. I must support it because my constituents have been negatively affected by the former government's decisions in relation to this bill. I must support it because upon the passing of this bill, it will be making Alberta a better place for my constituents and all Albertans to live. At its essence, this bill is rooted in our belief that as Alberta is coming out of the worst recession in generations, we will not leave people behind. Our recovery needs to be a recovery for all Albertans. I believe that all Albertans deserve to live with dignity and have a chance to succeed, as the minister said. My constituents with disabilities, seniors, and those needing income supports have told me and showed me how they have struggled to pay rent and to put food on the table. This legislation not only provides better supports today to help them to do just that, it ensures AISH clients and low-income Albertans won't need to fight to afford the basics tomorrow. It provides stability and certainty that as cost of living increases, so will their benefit rates. The opposition leader in our legislature has said we should match the BC level, and in fact the minister has said that too, or he referenced that as well. And as he also said, that would cut AISH by $500 a month. I say absolutely not. And our government agrees that we cannot and must not do that. Do you remember in the spring of 2015, the Premier before the last election presented a budget which showed cuts across the board? A current member of the official opposition has said in the last couple of months that his party will cut, and it will hurt. Sounds like the replaying of a bad record, a bad scenario for Albertans, and in particular for vulnerable Albertans who are finally seeing some relief in their lives with this bill. Since being elected, many constituents have come to my office and spoken to me about each of these areas. Both those persons with disabilities, seniors, and their advocates have told me over and over again that it should not just be increased, but indexed with inflation so that they don't take 2 steps forward only to take 1, 2, or even 3 steps back. One of my constituents, Ben Rowley, an AISH recipient, said, and I quote, "With cost of living increases, I don't have to worry about getting poorer and poorer every day. And Ben, I'm happy you gave me that, and now it's in Hansard forever. Throughout the economic downturn, our government has committed to maintaining benefits. And in fact, we increased overall program funding for AISH, income support, and seniors benefits to support increased demand for services. Our province has grown, and so has the need for services, all services. Our government has also committed to revisiting rate increases, indexation, as the province's finances would allow. Every little bit counts and increases the quality of one's life. Having stability through indexation does add peace of mind, and that's what my constituents have told me. Do we have more to do? Absolutely, but this is a huge beginning by setting in stone indexing with inflation. I have spoken to senior after senior, both at Lethbridge Senior Citizens Organization in Lethbridge West and Norbridge Senior Centre in Lethbridge East, and incidentally, where I've been a member for a number of years. In speaking about this bill, I still have to speak a little bit about history, and I will speak mostly about Norbridge, where I have spent a considerable amount of time. And I will also speak from my perspective as a senior. When I speak to anyone at Norbridge, they tell me about the struggles living on a fixed income and how it becomes more and more difficult to make ends meet. They talk to me about their hearing aids because I can relate. They talk to me about their income tax. I initially referred them to their MP, but realized that to get something done, they needed to go see Harry or Laurie at Norbridge, who are member volunteers, who worked with over 1,300 people last year to address tax and tax-related issues, including senior supports, which require that one's income tax be filed each year to have access. They also tell me how important it is to be able to come to Norbridge and talk to me and my staff about their concerns, whether it's an issue of their power being turned off because they just can't make ends meet, or just to tell me they have a date for their knee surgery. They talk to me about their adult children who have special needs or disabilities of different sorts. They speak to me about being members of Norbridge, where they have a place to come every day and be active, enjoy the jam session on Monday, or play floor bowling on another day, or just visit with friends. When I ask any of the members what the focus is at Norbridge, they may not be able to pinpoint exactly what that may be. However, if one were to ask Mike or Bob or Pat or Harry, they will tell you it is prevention and support. It really speaks about the prevention of social isolation, the prevention of injury, the prevention of dementia by providing activities to stimulate one's mind. It speaks to inclusion and community, and they are very proud of that focus. It provides support. I think this bill has taken huge first steps with indexation. And when Rodney spoke to me last week, he said, that is fantastic. And then he said he had some ideas for future improvements. Rodney's never without an idea. Rodney, they have been shared. I know we have more work to do, and I will continue to support what this bill is doing and to advocate for future improvements as finances allow. Now, a quick highlight reel for this bill. There will be a one-time increase to AISH and income support to account for cost of living increases, and then annual indexing with inflation going forward. As of January 1st, 250,000 vulnerable Albertans receive increases in financial supports. Annual indexing of Alberta senior benefits and related special needs assistance program, supplementary accommodation benefit, and seniors lodge program. Protection against negative inflation. Investment, 46 million in 2018 and 19, and 194 million in 2019 and 20. All of those are reasons to support this bill. And I ask every one of my colleagues, everybody in this room, to support this bill. It makes a difference for every single Albertan. Thank you.
Thank you, honourable member. Are there any members wishing to speak under 29-2A? 29-2A?
Yes, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Thanks to the honourable member from Lethbridge East. I always get both sides of that town confused. I apologize, or the members for which side they represent, for her speech. I do want to clarify, in her speech she made some accusations in her speech against members of this side of the House, specifically implying that there would be a cut, or that we have said that we would cut, and that there would be a certain amount that people would lose on AISH, or those similar things, because that in fact, Madam Speaker, is not factual. The member is mistaken on that fact, and that's okay. I understand that it was probably hard to adjust the talking points when it was found out that we were voting yes, but nevertheless, that is not factual. But I am interested in the honourable member's remarks, particularly her remarks to the independent member for the independent member from Lloydminster. Why didn't you stand up? Madam Speaker, I would ask the same question then in 29-2A on comments and questions. Why did this member not stand up as the government that she belongs to, Madam Speaker, brought in a punishing carbon tax to hurt these very people? Why did she not stand up when it took 3.5 years of people on AISH and of seniors saying this is a problem that has to be fixed? Why does she stand by idly waiting for that to happen and not making it clear that action needed to happen? The fact is, Madam Speaker, what that member wants to forget, and her colleagues, and at the same time then point and accuse other members of this place of planning to do huge cuts, which is not true. It's just that's not what this side of the House is intending, and we've been clear on that, and we won't be campaigning on that. But while she and her colleagues are doing that, they want to just disregard and forget about the fact that constituents that they even represent are being hurt by the policy decisions of this government. I've been in Lethbridge a few times this year. I have met with homeless shelters in Lethbridge. I've met with social agencies in Lethbridge and nonprofit agencies in Lethbridge, who the number one thing they still bring up they bring up with us when we meet with them, is how much the carbon tax is punishing the very people that they're trying to serve. Every time that I talk to former colleagues that work in the nonprofit sector with people facing poverty, they bring up the carbon tax. This side of the House stood inside this place and have moved amendments several times in an attempt to try to help those populations, and that member and her colleagues voted against those amendments. Food banks, which we have been bringing up here several times over the last several years through this process, have repeatedly and very publicly talked about the struggles they're having already because of the economic downturn that this government has overseen and created in some cases, and made worse certainly. And say what's happening to the carbon tax is making it harder for them to be able to serve people in vulnerable positions. That member, where was she and her colleagues when it came time to stand up for them at that time? My point, Madam Speaker, is it's a little rich to sit here with a speech and make up random accusations of us intending to cut things, which we're not going to, and that's another reason why we are supporting this bill, because we think quite frankly, it's been too long. As some other members have brought up, I'm shocked it's taken this government this long to get a piece of legislation here to be able to start to address this issue. But it's a little rich to do that, to stand up and say, we support this, those guys and gals over there are evil, they're going to cut everything. not accurate, and then ignore the fact that you've stood, or that member and her colleagues have sat in this place repeatedly over and over, voting for something that is actually hurting those populations. The completely attempting to ignore that fact is frustrating. And it doesn't matter whether it's frustrating for me, but it's certainly frustrating for the people that it impacts. I'm disappointed in that. I was very disappointed each and every time that the members of the government caucus stood on record.
Thank you, honourable member. Are there any other members wishing to speak to the bill? The honourable member for Calgary Fish Creek.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and an opportunity to rise in support of Bill 26 today, and just wanted to add my comments and some context to this. Madam Speaker, I've had a great opportunity during my life and career to work with many organizations in the nonprofit sector, from CUPS to Momentum Food Bank, UNICEF, Red Cross, Meals on Wheels, Chinese Services Association, Fresh Start Horizon, Drop-In Center, Calgary Homeless Foundation, Mustard Seed and From the Cold, and the list goes on. So I've had an opportunity to work with them either as a volunteer or in fundraising opportunities as well to help them to meet the needs of vulnerable and in some cases Albertans that are in need of assistance over and above what we can provide as governments, and I certainly salute those organizations. I've also been lucky enough to be brought up about giving back to the community, about volunteering in the community, and ensuring that we as Albertans, not just as a government, but as individuals and as communities, that we support the individuals in our community. And I've been lucky enough in my corporate career to also work for some companies that believe when you do that you must also do good. And that often when you do good, it actually helps you to do well. And those are some things that I think that I've learned in my career, that those two things can go hand in hand together as we support the communities around us. And the opportunity we have as Albertans, working Albertans, to support the vulnerable in our community by being responsible, but also having a very close eye on the fact that we need to generate wealth to achieve that. Madam Speaker, we've seen through the actions of this government a lot of negative impacts on organizations in my constituency, recreation facilities, places of worship, community centers, nonprofits, other individuals that are struggling on fixed income households. And I see that all the time. I see the recreation facilities coming up with their own programs to ensure that families that are going through difficult times can still attend hockey camps and be involved with sports in their community and have access to services. I see in the places of worship in my own community, the Deer Park United Church, for example, is right beside a Calgary Housing Company facility, and they do incredible work in supporting many of those families, the new immigrants there, who are working on very fixed incomes. And that work is being impacted by the fact that they have carbon taxes on their facilities as well, that are deeply impacting their ability to deliver those services to members of the community who are going through difficult times or coming here and settling into a new situation, who may be on the fixed income through AISH and other programs that have been in place. But Madam Speaker, I think that we have to understand here that there's a recognition that although we have, as Albertans, we have a commitment to sustain and provide adequate funding and supports necessary for the vulnerable people and those that through no fault of their own need that kind of support, that we also have the ability to fund that through fiscal responsibility, and that by taking care of those vulnerable people in our communities, and I applaud the increases here, I believe we need to ensure that those people that are on these incomes, the AISH and other programs, that they do have the funding that they need to live a safe and comfortable life. And we went through it with one of my wife's cousins, where she was worried. I could tell she's physically and handicapped and blind and deaf and various other disabilities, and the concern, the worries that she had about her budget and whether she was going to be able to afford things and maybe to be able to save a little bit of that every month in case there was an emergency. And those things I think are good, and the indexing I think is important for us as well. But we need to also make sure that we're not overburdening the middle class to achieve that. We have to make sure that we have an economy that is robust, that we do well in this province so that we can do good. And that, to me, is an issue that we need to address here about the sustainability. We've seen it in many other government programs where they damage the affordability and the balance of costs on one side. They damage those, and then they try and put a Band-Aid on things by increasing things. And I think they need to look inside themselves, again, 3.5 years to get this bill out. But in the meantime, we've seen the carbon tax impact those fixed income individuals. We have a 67% increase in that carbon tax coming, and that is not going to be offset in any way, shape, or form by this, nor with, obviously, we've heard that that money is going to go into general revenues, not into rebates. And quite frankly, the minimum wage, which was brought in to supposedly, again, help lower income individuals, at the same time is going to damage those on fixed income that are on programs like ACE in this province, and the seniors on fixed incomes and others. So the unintended consequences of some of these programs are things that we can't always throw Band-Aids on, Madam Speaker. We need to ensure that we're looking at those as we're bringing them in so that we don't have to keep going back. But indexing, I think, is something that is a natural thing to do, because we don't want those people on those fixed incomes to be falling behind day by day by day and year after year to the point where they can't put the food on their tables. It's hard for them to make rent. It's hard for them to live a respectable and respectful life, and to ensure them that they have that opportunity. So, Madam Speaker, I think that it's incumbent on all of us in this House to ensure that we take care of our vulnerable people, that those people in our economy here are given the opportunity to generate that wealth so that we can do this. And I think I mentioned it in the question period today, not with red ink, not with a larger family-sized container of red ink, and that we actually learn how to sustain this economy in a way that allows us to do well and to do good and to deliver those types of services on an ongoing basis, and then we can look forward 5 and 10 and 15 and 20 years and know that we can afford to do that, and maybe we can even afford to do it better and to take care of those people in a higher and more respectful and compassionate way. So, Madam Speaker, we'll be supporting this bill. I'll be supporting this bill. There are more questions we would like to address, I think, in Committee of the Whole as well. But I do thank the Minister for bringing this forward, for addressing this. It's taken a little while, but here we are, and an opportunity for us to do the right thing, and I look forward to supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Are there any other members wishing to speak under 29(2)A? Are there any other members wishing to speak to the bill? Seeing none, I'll call on the Honourable Minister of Community and Social Services to close debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to all the members who participated in the debate, and I look forward to more detailed discussion in the next stage. So with that, I close the debate.